All right, hello again. So we're going to talk about flexbox some more. Well, depending on which order you're seeing these videos in, but I'm assuming you've seen something about flexbox already. Yeah, so what we've got here is we've got a file with some containers in it, and we're going to use that to sort of explore some things about flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. These are the squishy, sort of amorphous, ghosty kind of properties for flexbox that are a little confusing and behave like a little bit unpredictably unless you really start thinking about it. But it is a little, I'm not going to lie, it is a little bit sketchy as far as how those work. Depending on, again, what order you're seeing these in. So I've got this file here. I've got each one of these is in a container. And like I said, you may have seen these already, so you know what's going on. But there's a container, which is the gray box, and that has a class of container on it. And then there's flex items inside of those, and those have classes of flex item on them. Then we've got a bunch of classes here that are sort of named like the CSS would be, but not exactly. And then we're just going to add these classes in and see what happens. I also have a few other ones just to show you some examples. Combined 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's a bunch of notes in here, so check out the notes. Like I said, some of these things are a little bit tricky and complicated. But if you look down at the actual containers, they're usually a container. Well, they're always a container. And then you've got some flex items inside of it, and then some of them have some extra classes on them. So the extra classes are already in the code in the HTML. We're just going to define them and play around and see if we can figure out what's going on with this flexbox stuff. All right, so let's go back up to the top. So like before, maybe you've seen this already, but we're going to turn each of these into a flexbox. And before I forget to, I have this file open in Firefox as well, because Firefox, which sounds like Flexbox actually. Firefox has a really cool way to visualize what's going on with Flexbox, so remind me to look at that. You guys can't remind me, huh? You're watching on somewhere. Okay, so we're gonna add display Flexbox, just like we've probably done, unless this is your first one of these. We're gonna say display flex, actually. And as soon as we do that, it changes each of the containers into a flex container, right? And then each of these, so that's a flex container. By default, it goes left to right as a row. Before we did that, just that one line, right? They just stack up just like that as, since they're regular block elements, they just stack up on top of each other. But as soon as we add display flex, then now it's a row and the elements will line up next to each other. They're doing some different things right now because of their inherent size and some stuff like that. So we're gonna go through and take a look at these. We also need to add I wanted to add the default flex or properties for each item. So we say flex 0, 1, and auto. And what that does, and it's listed right there for you too, but that is short for flex grow 0, which means the items won't grow really by default. And then flex shrink 1 means they can shrink. So in this case, 0 and 1 means kind of no and yes. And then flex basis, which is the third thing we're talking about. These are the things we're talking about. Means the size of the item is based on its contents. So it's kind of like let the contents decide. So a lot of these things, and that's the default. So you shouldn't have seen anything happen by adding that probably. But a lot of these, a lot of the measurements and things in Flexbox are affected by the content and other things. So it's a little bit flexible, right? That's why it has Flexbox in the name. See what I did there? And then, yeah, you just have to kind of play with it and figure it out sometimes, and then to get it to do what you want. But it is a little bit complicated sometimes. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is flex grow. So if we look over here, let me zoom in here. Flex grow is it defines the ability of a flex item to grow if necessary. It accepts a unitless value that serves as a proportion. So it's kind of like a ratio. It dictates what amount of the available space inside the flex container the item should take up. If all if all of them are set to 1, the remaining spaces contained will be distributed equally. Yeah, so if something is set to 2, it should take up twice as much space, or it'll try to at least. So I say there it'll try because a lot of these things won't be exact, but it will. Flexbox is trying to do what you want it to do, but it might not be exact measurements sometimes. The default is 0, which is no, but content can affect things. So that is grow. So by default, it's 0, but we're going to change that and see what happens. So flexgrow1, where that's the name of that class, we're just going to put in the actual CSS for that. So we're going to say flexgrow1. And what happened? So this one, let's look at the code again. I think it's the first one here. So this one has a class of flexgrow1, this one box, and this one has a flexgrow of 2, this number 2 here. So that's what's going on. It already had the class applied, right? So don't get confused about that. The classes are already applied. We're just defining them now. And then we're going to say flexgrow2 for this one. So like I said, these class names are just made up, or maybe I said that, but this is the actual CSS, right? So the class names do look a lot like the CSS, but that's on purpose to make them kind of, but no, not exactly. The syntax isn't the same, right? You say flex-grow:1 instead of flex-grow-1. Anyway, okay, so we've got flexgrow1 on this guy, on 1, that's convenient, and then flexgrow2 is on the second box. So you can kind of see that they are, the second one is about twice as big as the first. Now the padding and things do affect it, but generally you're saying like, okay, go ahead and grow at a ratio or a proportion double this one grows. So this one grew a little bit and this one grew about twice as much. These guys stayed the same, I think. And they kind of move, they resize obviously as you resize the page. Let's look at this in, I think this is the right file, yeah. So now I'm in Flexbox, or in Firefox. See, it sounds like Flexbox. And if I right click on one of these, and you can do this too when you have time, is if I look at that, I right click and go to inspect, it has this cool inspector for Flexbox. So if I select, if I can get this all on screen here. Here's the first one. We can see that we set the flex grow to 1, and I can turn that off and on, just like in Chrome, but I can turn it on, off and on, and you can see that it's growing. And then when I turn it on, you can see, here's the setting. It says flexibility, flex grow 1, item was set to grow. Yes, it was. It wasn't at 0. And then it tells you how much it grew by, or yeah. And then it gives you the final size. It tells you that down here. It tells you the flex basis, and then how big it actually was. So lots of cool stuff in there. This one, if we go here, it says flex grow 2, and look at that. The size here is the item grew by 130 pixels. This one grew by 260. It's exactly twice as much because we put a flex grow of 1 on this one and a flex grow of 2 on that one. So that's what I mean. It is a proportion, but it is the padding and some other things can affect it, and the content can affect it. So don't take that as a exact, like it's always going to be exactly twice as much. I think it is leaving out it's probably not exactly twice as big. This one is 139. This one is 270. Yeah, it's not exactly the same because there's padding and stuff in there affecting it too. One thing I was going to tell you later, but I'll tell you now, the padding is not included in the Flexbox module as far as size goes. It's only looking at content. So in regular CSS, in the box model, we could say box sizing border box, and this would count. This 270 would count, well, not this 270, but the size of the item would count the padding and the border. And that's a very common thing to do, is to set the box sizing to border box to make everything like the size you think it should be. But in Flexbox, it doesn't. So the size of the content here is 270, but that's not including the padding on the sides. So really it's 290. And then plus another 1 pixel on the border, so it's 292, something like that. So that's why it's not going to be exactly the same size, or maybe not exactly what you think it'll be. Okay, we spent enough time on that, I think. So let's go back here. So that was flex grow. Let's do flex shrink. Easy to see what this is probably going to do. I'm going to do flex shrink 0 on this one. And let's just go ahead and put in the other one too. I'm going to copy and paste to be lazy and or efficient. You can copy and paste your own code if you want, right? As long as you don't copy mistakes. So now I've got flex shrink of 0 on this first one. I think it's the first one, and the flex shrink of 2 on the second one. So what's going on? You might need to resize your browser to, oops, that's the wrong one. Resize your browser to see what's going on. If I get big enough, they look all the same. But then once you start getting, I think it's called pressure, like the David Bowie song. I think it's David Bowie, Under Pressure, right? Sorry, I won't sing anymore. I'm a pretty good singer though. If you can find me on YouTube, maybe not. I'm digressing here. So item number 1 says no shrinky, right? It says shrink 0. So it's not shrinking, it's staying that same size. It's not allowed to shrink. Item number 2 is shrink 2, which is, it'll shrink at a ratio of 2, which is twice as fast as 1. We don't have anything set to 1, so we can't really see that. But if you resize, you will start to see that these guys are now bigger, I think. Yeah, right there. So it depends where we are, right? Because the content affects it, the padding affects it, like we said, but right now you can see that this one is a little smaller than these and much smaller than this because this is not allowed to shrink at all. So again, it's another way that you can kind of influence how things resize. So you see how it's resizing at a different rate than the others because it has a flex shrink of 2. Okay, so the next thing is flex basis. Let's take a look at this. So flex basis, I gotta zoom way over here to get that so you guys can see it. It's the default size of an element before the remaining space is distributed. It's like an ideal size along the main axis, so it can be a height or a width depending if you're in rows or columns. So it's not the same as height or width because flex basis works in both directions. If you're in a column, if you're in a row, it's going to be the width. If you're in a column, it's going to be the height because it's along the main axis. Remember, the main axis is this way on a row and it's this way on a column, right? It could be a lot of different, there's a bunch of different keywords. There's a bunch of units you can use. The auto keyword, which is the default, says look at my width or height property. So it's kind of like width and height in that case. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So let's just try some. So the default is flex basis auto. So I'm going to say flex basis auto because I have no imagination. I use that joke all the time. Flex basis auto, and you shouldn't see anything change, right? So right now the content is determining how big that box is. Because it's looking at the content, right? And it does some crazy calculations in its little CSS brain. But let's go flex basis. For this one, on flex basis 50, we're going to do flex basis 50%. Now it's going to get interesting. Maybe, not really. So now we said flex basis 50%. So I kind of call flex basis kind of a suggested width or height. So it'll try to be that size, but if things don't work out, they don't work out. So if I put on flex basis 50%, you can see it's about 50%. Of the width of what? Of its parent container, which is the flex container. So it's about 50 and it resizes kind of like width 50%. Yeah, so there you go. So there's flex basis of 50% in action. Okay, so let's move down. So I do have a class called padding 30, which is used a little bit later, and you don't have to fill that one out because I'm just using it to show a couple things. Now we're going to go to combined 1. And all we're going to type in here is flex 1, which is what a lot of people use. I don't know if you saw that happen. It's what a lot of people use, or what can be used to do equal width columns. So let me take that out because you didn't see that happen in real time. Let me take that out. So that's what it looks like right now, right? And then I put flex 1 on there, and then you get 5 columns that are the same width. So this is actually short. This is a little bit of a tricky one. It's actually short for, and it's kind of strange too. So it's short for flex grow of 1, so that the first number is grow. You're not specifying the other 2, but it defaults to or goes to flex shrink of 1. So it's allowed to shrink or grow. and then flex basis of 0, which is a weird thing. It means they want to be as small as possible. They have no intrinsic width, but they're allowed to grow to fit content. But what they end up doing is these grew to fit the container. So it is a little funky sometimes, but this stuff. But yeah, that's how that one works. This one has the same thing going on, but the difference in this one, so this one also has combined 1 on it. Let me go down here. If I can find it, it's a little bit hard. Yeah. So this one also has the class called combined 1 on the container. This is the same. The only difference is this one, the second box, this guy right here, has a padding of 30 that I added in there. So the padding does affect. Remember I said earlier that the padding is not used in the calculations for the width or the flex basis. So it you can get some uneven stuff because it's not counting that, right? So so if you resize this, let me grab this and resize it. You can see how this guy is bigger than those. So it's scaling it, and it's scaling it proportionally, but it's sort of making up the numbers for the padding to how it scales. So it's not the same size. These are obviously not all the same width. There is a workaround, which this one already has on it. So let me show you what that looks like. Here's the workaround. So the workaround is since this has padding on it and that's not counted in the flexbox model, it's just kind of added on and then scaled. If you make this not a flex item by putting it inside of another box, then they're all the same. That doesn't make any sense, right? So let's look at this again. So we've got combined 1. We've got this flex item number 1. We've got flex item number 2, which is there. We've got 3, 4, and 5. This one is the only one that has padding on it. So by putting it inside of another div right here, then this becomes the flex item. And this is not. This is just something inside that flex item. So this box obviously contains this box, including the padding. So it's a way to take the padding into account. It's kind of a hack. And I learned about this from this great video from Kevin Powell. I probably showed you a ton of videos from him. He's great. He's good at explaining this complicated stuff. But sometimes I need to be explained to too. Or actually most of the time, according to my family. Okay, so that does fix that though, right? So now we can see box number 2, even though it has more padding, it is, I can't grab the edges. There we go. It is the same width as the rest of these guys. This one is bigger. See how that's bigger? So that is a workaround to get that to do it. Another workaround, which I think is also in that video. Hopefully that video is still there long after or the Earth has turned into a cinder or whatever. But maybe not. But it does explain this. A better option for this one maybe is grid. So you can use CSS grid. Remember that Flexbox is usually a 2-dimensional or 1-dimensional thing. It's either horizontal in a row or vertical in a column. But you can use it in 1 dimension, and it's a little more intuitive as far as how you size things in grid. So if you run into something like that, think about maybe using grid. And you will see grid or have seen grid stuff already, depending on where you are in the course or which course you're even in. This video might show up in different courses. Okay, so that is the workaround. Let's try a different way, doing equal columns, using flex basis 100%. So let's go up here. I think it's up here. There's a bunch of notes in here too. Take a look when you really can't sleep and you want to fall asleep right away. You can take a look at those. By the way, I didn't mention how this was done. This selector, I don't think I mentioned it. What does this selector mean? This means something with a class of combined 2, and that's the child selector, which is the creepy selector in my view. They should change the name of it. And then that's the universal selector. So this means any direct descendant of something with combined 2. Does that make sense? The asterisk, the universal selector, means anything that's anything actually. This means it's a direct descendant of something with this class. Oh, I just messed that up. Something with this class, right? So that's what that means. So why is that on there? Because if I go in down here and I can see combine 2, I don't know where that is. Here it is, right there. So here's combine 2, that's the div. That means these guys, that selector affects these guys. I don't have to go in there and add anything. I'm just saying any direct descendant of this is what's being selected. So that's the flex items. You probably knew that already, but I want to make sure you knew that. Okay, so under combine 2, we're gonna put, or we're on combine 1. No, we're on combine 2. We're gonna say flex basis of 100%. So this is another way to do sort of equal columns. You'll have the same issue with the padding. I think if you have padding, different padding, you can have padding, but if you have different padding, it's gonna might cause you issues. But in this case, when you say flex basis of 100%, you're saying that they want to be as big as possible, but they can shrink to fit available space, all at the same rate. And I said refer to that video again. That's also right here. So on this one, they want to get as small as possible and they can expand. This one, they want to be as big as possible and they can contract. I know it's kind of two directions to get to the same answer, but yeah, it's 2 ways you can do it. All right, I think that's good on that. Let's go to combine 3. So here's where we're going to use the flex shorthand, which is very popular, even though I don't really like it, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to say flex 1, 0, and 30%. So what does that actually mean? Oh, I put in the wrong thing in there. This should be 30. So that means it is allowed to grow. It is not allowed to shrink. And the flex basis is 30%. So what happens? Here's what happens. So it does grow. If I can grab it here. And then it's tough to get it to show what I wanted to show, which is the 30%. Let me see if I can get it to go. I can't get it small enough. But it's what you're saying is you kind of want it to be 30% if it can, but it is allowed to grow, so it will grow. Let's do this. And I have that note in there. Let's change it to 0, 0, 30. Then what happens? If we do 0, 0, 30, that means the flex grow is actually, did we do? Yeah, I have 2 there, but anyway, let's do 0, 0, 30. And what does that mean? That means the flex grow is 0, the flex shrink is 0, so it's not allowed to shrink or grow. And then I should put a semicolon there. The flex basis is 30. So now what happens? It's 30% all the time. So a little bit different depending on what you put in these combinations. And these combinations take some getting used to, but I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So the first number is the grow, the second number is the shrink, and the third number is the flex basis. So you're saying, can you grow, can you shrink, at what rate? So if you used a bigger number than 1, it would be like twice as fast kind of thing. And then the flex basis is the suggested size, right? Either height or width. All right, we're gonna leave that at, let's put it back at 1 so we see what happens. I know I have 2 here, it should be 1. Yeah. So there you go. So now the second one, we're gonna do combine 4. We're gonna set it a little bit differently and try to show you what the difference between a little bit between width and flex basis. So I'm gonna say flex grow, and let's do 2. So that means it can grow twice as fast as something else, I guess, right? And then we're gonna say flex shrink, and let's do 0. And then we're going to give it a specific or explicit width. It's called explicit, which is not dirty. 60%. All right. So now you can see the difference here. So this one uses flex grow of 2, which means it can grow. It's not allowed to shrink, even though it will shrink. But if we get out big enough, I wanted to show you how this looks a little bit different. So the deal is the content is affecting this. So, but you can see that this is a little bigger, right? Even though this width is set to 60 and this flex space is set to 30, they're not double the size. But it is taking the size of the content into account. You can also see that you can get things like this. Since we have no wrap turned on, this one is running out of the box. Yeah. So, because that is not, we're not allowing it to wrap, and the box is not big enough to hold this thing with those other 4 boxes or 5 boxes. That's why I put extra boxes in there. I was gonna see if we turned on flex wrap, what would happen. And by default, there is no wrap, right? Yeah, so it's not really showing me a wrap situation. So I'm gonna leave that off. Maybe we'll put that in another video. But anyway, I wanted to show you how you can use width or you can use flex spaces. They may behave a little differently. Obviously, you have to use width if it's a row, but if you can use flex spaces whether it's a row or a column. So that is one of the main differences too, right? Flex is just the main axis. I mean, flex basis is along the main axis, which is this way, but it could also be vertical. Width can only be width. If it's a column, it's going to be the width of the column. If it's a row, it's going to be the width of the row. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. I know it's complicated. It is. This is, like I said, this is the most vexing part. Vexing, fancy words, Mark. The most vexing part of Flexbox, at least for me, is these grow and shrink basically, because they're kind of weird, and it's hard to predict what they're going to do until you actually try it. I put a bunch of, like I said, notes in here for you guys, but hopefully that helps a little bit anyway, and I will talk to you again later.